There are wounds that do not bleed, bruises that never turn blue, and battles that leave no sound behind them. Yet they shape the way a soul walks into a room, the way a voice hesitates before speaking, the way a heart learns to doubt its own rhythm. Emotional abuse is not always loud. Sometimes it is a whisper repeated so often that it begins to sound like truth. It is the slow erosion of self, the quiet theft of confidence, the kind of pain that teaches you to question your own worth. But let me remind you of something powerful. No voice, no matter how persistent, has the authority to define who you are unless you surrender to it. And today we gather not to relive the hurt, but to reclaim what was always ours, the dignity, the strength, and the unshakable truth that even after being diminished, we were never destroyed. Emotional abuse does not arrive with warning signs that the world easily recognizes. It does not always shout or strike. Often, it settles quietly into daily life, disguising itself as criticism, control, or even concern. It is in the words that belittle rather than build, in the silence that punishes rather than protects, in the constant shifting of blame that leaves you questioning your own reality. You may find yourself shrinking, apologizing for things you did not break, carrying guilt that was never yours to hold, and because there are no visible scars, you begin to wonder if the pain is real at all. But pain does not need permission to exist. What you feel is valid, even when it cannot be seen. There comes a moment, subtle yet powerful, when you begin to notice the pattern. You start to see that the hurt is not accidental, that it repeats, that it lingers long after the words have been spoken. Recognition is not weakness. It is awakening. It is the quiet courage of saying, "This does not feel right," even when your voice trembles. And in that moment, you begin to separate your truth from the story that has been imposed upon you. You begin to understand that confusion was never your nature. It was planted there. You must also understand how emotional abuse reshapes the way you see yourself. It teaches you to doubt your worth, to second-guess your instincts, to believe that love must be earned through endurance. But love was never meant to make you smaller. Love does not demand that you disappear so someone else can feel large. When you recognize emotional abuse, you are not just identifying harm, you are reclaiming your right to exist fully without fear of being diminished. It is not easy to accept this truth because it asks you to confront what you may have tried to excuse or endure. You may have told yourself that it was normal, that it would change, that you were strong enough to carry it. And yes, you are strong, but your strength was never meant to be measured by how much pain you can survive. True strength is found in your willingness to see clearly, to name what has been hidden, and to refuse to let it define you any longer. As you begin to recognize emotional abuse for what it is, something within you starts to shift. The weight of confusion begins to lift, and in its place comes clarity. You realize that your voice matters, that your feelings are not exaggerations, that your worth is not up for negotiation. This recognition does not end the journey, but it marks the beginning of your return to yourself. And once you have seen the truth, you cannot unsee it. You can only rise from it, stronger, wiser, and no longer willing to accept anything that asks you to forget who you are. There is a quiet kind of courage that does not announce itself, that does not demand applause or recognition, yet it carries the power to change a life. It is the courage to name what has hurt you, not to hide it behind polite smiles or dismiss it as something small, but to look it in the eye and call it what it is. Pain, when left unnamed, grows in the shadows. It whispers doubts, reshapes memories, and convinces you that you are the problem. But the moment you give it a name, you begin to loosen its hold. You begin to take back the authority over your own story. For a long time, you may have been taught to stay silent. Perhaps you were told that speaking up would make things worse, that your feelings were too much, or that you should simply endure. And so you carried it quietly, carefully, as if acknowledging it would somehow break you. But silence does not protect you, it confines you. It builds walls around your truth until even you begin to forget what it sounds like. Naming your pain is not an act of rebellion, it is an act of self-respect. It is you saying, "What I feel matters, and I will no longer pretend that it does not." There is something deeply transformative about hearing your own truth spoken out loud. It may come in a whisper at first, hesitant and unsure, but even that whisper has power. It says that you are no longer willing to be a silent witness to your own suffering. It says that you recognize the difference between what was done to you and who you are. Because you are not the harsh words you endured. You are not the doubt that was planted in you. You are not the fear that kept you small. Those things may have touched your life, but they do not define it. When you begin to name your pain, you also begin to release the shame that was never yours to carry. Emotional abuse has a way of making you feel responsible for the harm you experienced, as though if you had been different, quieter, better, it would not have happened. But pain is not a personal failure. It is a response to being treated in a way that no human being deserves. And by naming it, you place that responsibility back where it belongs, not on your shoulders, but on the actions that caused it. This process is not always easy. There may be moments when the truth feels heavy, when speaking it brings tears you tried to hold back. But those tears are not signs of weakness. They are evidence that something within you is healing. They are the release of everything you have held inside for far too long. And with each word you speak, each truth you acknowledge, you begin to feel a little more like yourself again. In naming your pain, you are not staying stuck in it. You are moving through it. You are choosing honesty over denial, clarity over confusion, and self-awareness over silence. And in that choice, there is strength. Not the loud, forceful kind that demands to be seen, but a steady, unshakable strength that grows from within. The kind that reminds you, gently but firmly, that your voice is yours to use, your story is yours to tell, and your healing begins the moment you decide that your truth deserves to be heard. There is a dangerous habit that emotional abuse tries to teach you, a quiet conditioning that slips into your thoughts and begins to rewrite who you believe you are. It tells you that the harsh words spoken to you must carry some truth, that the constant criticism is a reflection of your worth, that if you were better, kinder, stronger, then perhaps you would be treated differently. But that is the greatest deception of all. Cruelty, no matter how often it is repeated, does not become truth. It remains what it has always been, a projection of someone else's brokenness, not a measure of your value. You must come to understand that not every voice deserves a home inside your mind. Just because something was said to you does not mean it belongs to you. Words can be thrown like stones, but you are not required to build your identity from the rubble they leave behind. There is power in pausing, in questioning, in refusing to accept every label that has been placed upon you. You are allowed to say, "This is not mine," and in doing so, you begin to separate yourself from the weight of what was never meant to define you. It is not always easy to make that distinction, especially when the words have been repeated over time. Familiarity has a way of disguising harm, making it feel normal, even believable. You may catch yourself echoing those same criticisms in your own thoughts, speaking to yourself in a voice that was never truly yours. But awareness is the turning point. The moment you recognize that inner voice and realize it was learned, not born within you, is the moment you can begin to change it. You can choose to replace it slowly and patiently with something kinder, something truer. Refusing to internalize cruelty is not about pretending it never happened. It is about acknowledging that it did, while also deciding that it will not have the final say in who you become. You can remember the pain without carrying its poison. You can honor your experience without allowing it to limit your future. This is where your strength reveals itself, not in denying the hurt, but in refusing to let it take root in your identity. There will be moments when doubt tries to return, when those old words resurface and ask to be believed again. In those moments, you must stand firm in what you now know. You must remind yourself that you are not defined by someone else's inability to see your worth. Their failure to recognize your value does not erase it. It simply reflects their limitations, not yours. As you continue this journey, you will begin to feel lighter, not because the past has changed, but because your relationship to it has. You no longer carry every word as truth, no longer absorb every criticism as fact. Instead, you move forward with a clearer understanding of who you are, someone who has been tested, yes, but not shaped by cruelty. Someone who has heard the noise, yet chosen not to become it. And in that choice, there is freedom. A quiet, steady freedom that allows you to rebuild yourself on a foundation that is truly yours. A foundation not made of fear or doubt, but of self-respect, awareness, and the unwavering belief that no matter what was said to you, your worth has always existed beyond it. There is a silence that does not come from peace, but from being unheard for far too long. It settles in slowly, teaching you to measure your words, to soften your truth, to hold back the very things that make you who you are. You begin to speak less, not because you have nothing to say, but because you have learned that your voice might be dismissed, twisted, or ignored. And over time, that silence starts to feel safer than expression. But what feels safe is not always what sets you free. Somewhere within you, your voice has been waiting. It has not disappeared. No matter how long it has been quiet, it has been gathering strength in the background, holding on to your truth, your thoughts, your feelings, everything that makes you whole. Reclaiming it does not require a grand moment or a perfect speech. It begins in small, steady ways. It begins when you allow yourself to say what you feel without immediately questioning its validity. It begins when you choose honesty over comfort, even if your voice trembles as it rises. You may find that when you first begin to speak again, it feels unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. That is because you are stepping into a space that was once denied to you. You are breaking a pattern that told you to stay quiet, to stay agreeable, to stay small. And breaking patterns often feels unsettling before it feels empowering. But every word you speak in your truth is a step toward reclaiming yourself. Every sentence is a reminder that your voice was never meant to be controlled by someone else's approval. There is also a certain fear that can come with being heard. The fear of being misunderstood, of facing resistance, of being told once again that your feelings are too much. But your voice is not meant to be shaped by fear. It is meant to be guided by authenticity. Not everyone will understand you, and not everyone has to. What matters is that you understand yourself, that you honor your own experience enough to give it a voice. Because when you do, you create a space where your truth can exist freely without needing permission. As you continue to speak, you will notice a shift, not just in how others hear you, but in how you hear yourself. Your thoughts become clearer, your boundaries stronger, your sense of self more grounded. You begin to trust your own words again, to rely on your own perspective instead of constantly seeking validation. And in that trust, there is a quiet power that cannot be taken from you. Reclaiming your voice is not about becoming louder than everyone else. It is about becoming truer to yourself. It is about no longer silencing your needs, your emotions, your identity, just to keep the peace. Because peace that requires your silence is not peace at all. It is a quiet form of surrender, and you were not meant to live in surrender to someone else's comfort at the cost of your own existence. So you rise, not in anger, but in clarity, not to fight for attention, but to stand in your truth. And as your voice returns, steady and sure, it carries with it everything that was once held back. It carries your worth, your dignity, your right to be heard. And in that moment, you are no longer defined by the silence you endured, but by the courage it took to break it. There comes a time when you begin to understand that love, in its truest form, does not ask you to abandon yourself. It does not require you to bend until you break, or to give until there is nothing left of you to give. And yet, emotional abuse often teaches the opposite. It convinces you that saying no is selfish, that drawing a line is unkind, that protecting your peace is somehow a betrayal of others. But the truth is far simpler and far stronger than that. Every boundary you set is a declaration that you matter. Setting boundaries is not about building walls to shut the world out. It is about creating space where you can exist without being diminished. It is about deciding what you will accept and what you will no longer carry. And that decision does not need to be loud or confrontational to be powerful. Sometimes it is a quiet refusal, a calm step back, a gentle but firm understanding within yourself that enough is enough. You do not need permission to protect your well-being. You only need the willingness to honor it. At first, this may feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. When you have spent so long prioritizing someone else's needs over your own, choosing yourself can feel like stepping into unknown territory. You may worry about how others will react, whether they will understand, whether they will try to pull you back into old patterns. And some may, because boundaries change the roles people have grown used to. They disrupt what was once easy access to your time, your energy, your patience. But discomfort does not mean you are wrong. It often means you are growing. There is a quiet strength in standing firm without becoming hardened. Boundaries are not about anger, they are about clarity. They say, I respect myself enough to no longer accept what harms me. And in that statement, there is dignity. You are not trying to control anyone else's behavior. You are simply choosing your response to it. You are deciding that your peace is not negotiable, that your worth is not conditional, that your presence in any space will not come at the cost of your own well-being. You may find that as you begin to set boundaries, something within you begins to shift. The exhaustion that once felt constant starts to ease. The confusion begins to clear. You no longer feel as though you are constantly explaining, defending, or justifying your existence. Instead, you stand more firmly in who you are, with a sense of quiet assurance that does not depend on anyone else's approval. And in that space, you begin to feel a kind of freedom you may not have known before. It is important to remember that not everyone will welcome your boundaries, and that is not a reflection of your failure. It is a reflection of what they have grown accustomed to. Some may resist, some may question, and some may even walk away. But those who respect your boundaries are the ones who will meet you in a place of mutual respect, where you are valued not for how much you endure, but for who you are. Setting boundaries is, at its heart, an act of self-respect. It is you choosing to stand beside yourself, to protect your spirit, to honor your needs without apology. It is not an easy path, but it is a necessary one. And with each boundary you set, you are not pushing the world away. You are making room for a life where you can stand fully, breathe freely, and exist without shrinking. Guilt has a way of settling into the heart like something you were born carrying, even when it was placed there by someone else's hands. Emotional abuse often leaves behind this invisible burden, a sense that you are always at fault, always responsible, always one step away from having done something wrong. You begin to apologize without knowing why, to overthink your actions, to replay conversations in your mind, searching for mistakes that were never truly yours. But guilt, when it is not rooted in truth, is only another form of control that lingers long after the harm has been done. Letting go of guilt that was never yours is not an instant release. It is a slow unlearning of the belief that your presence alone is something that must constantly be justified. You may have been taught, directly or indirectly, that other people's reactions are your responsibility, that their anger is your failure, that their disappointment is your fault. But you are not the author of someone else's emotions. You are not the keeper of their choices, nor the cause of their inability to treat you with care. Understanding this is where freedom quietly begins to take shape. There is a deep exhaustion that comes from carrying guilt that does not belong to you. It weighs on your thoughts, your decisions, even your ability to feel at ease in your own life. You may find yourself trying to fix things that were never broken by you, trying to earn forgiveness you never needed in the first place. And in doing so, you slowly forget that you are allowed to exist without constant self-blame. But awareness interrupts that pattern. It allows you to pause and ask, is this truly mine to carry? And more often than not, the answer is no. Releasing that guilt does not mean denying what happened or pretending that pain did not exist. It means placing responsibility where it truly belongs. It means recognizing that empathy does not require self-erasure and kindness does not require self-punishment. You can understand someone's behavior without absorbing it as your fault. You can acknowledge conflict without internalizing blame that was never yours to begin with. This separation is not coldness, it is clarity. As you begin to loosen your grip on this misplaced guilt, you may notice how much space it has taken up in your life, space that could have held peace, self-trust, or even simple rest. And as that space slowly clears, you begin to feel something unfamiliar but grounding, a sense of relief that does not need explanation. You realize that you do not have to keep carrying what was never meant for you. You are allowed to set it down, even if you were told you had to hold it forever. There may still be moments when old thoughts return, when guilt tries to speak in familiar tones. But now, you have something you did not have before, awareness. And with awareness comes choice. You can choose not to accept what once felt automatic. You can choose to respond with truth instead of conditioning. You can choose to remind yourself again and again, if needed, that your worth is not measured by how much blame you are willing to carry. Letting go of this guilt is not about becoming indifferent. It is about becoming honest with yourself. It is about recognizing that you deserve to move through life without constantly turning inward to find fault. And in that recognition, something soft yet powerful begins to form within you. A steady understanding that you are not responsible for everything that hurt you, and you never were. Healing does not always announce itself with visible change. Some wounds remain invisible to the world, yet they shape the way you breathe, think, and move through life. Emotional abuse leaves exactly those kinds of wounds, silent ones, the kind that do not appear on the skin but settle deeply into memory, into instinct, into the way you interpret even the smallest interactions. And because no one else can see them, you may have learned to question whether they are real at all. But what is unseen is not unreal. It is often the deepest truth of all. Healing these wounds begins in a place where silence once lived. It begins when you stop dismissing your own inner experience simply because it does not have external proof. There is a quiet courage in admitting to yourself that something affected you, even when others did not notice it, even when others minimized it, even when you were told to move on before you were ready. You are not required to rush your healing to make it more acceptable to anyone else's understanding. There is a strange loneliness in carrying pain that others cannot recognize. You may find yourself smiling in rooms where no one knows what it cost you to arrive there. You may function, work, speak, and still feel as though a part of you is elsewhere, held back by memories that have not yet softened. But healing is not about erasing what happened. It is about learning how to exist without being controlled by it. It is about gently bringing yourself back into your own life, piece by piece, without forcing anything to be fixed overnight. You begin to notice that healing is not linear. Some days feel lighter, where the weight of the past seems distant. Other days bring it back with surprising intensity, as if nothing has changed. But even those difficult days are part of the process. Healing is not measured by constant progress. It is measured by your willingness to keep returning to yourself, even after moments of setback. Each time you choose not to abandon yourself in the face of old pain, something within you strengthens. There's also a quiet shift that happens when you stop trying to hide your wounds from yourself, not from the world, but from your own awareness. You stop pretending you were not affected. You stop minimizing what hurt you. And in that honesty, something begins to soften, not because the past becomes less painful, but because you are no longer fighting it alone within your own mind. You begin to sit with your experience instead of running from it, and in that stillness, understanding slowly takes root. Healing does not mean forgetting, it means remembering without being consumed. It means being able to look back without losing yourself in what you see. Over time, the intensity of the wound begins to change shape. What once felt overwhelming starts to feel like something you have learned to hold with more care, more distance, more compassion for yourself. And slowly, almost quietly, you begin to return, not to who you were before the hurt, but to someone who now carries both awareness and strength, someone who understands that even invisible wounds deserve attention, patience, and gentleness, someone who no longer needs the world to validate their pain in order to begin healing it. There comes a moment in life when you realize that being accepted by everyone often comes at the cost of being true to yourself. Emotional abuse has a way of deepening that struggle because it conditions you to seek approval as if it is the only form of safety. You begin to adjust your words, soften your boundaries, and reshape your personality just to avoid conflict or rejection. Slowly, approval starts to feel like oxygen, something you believe you cannot live without. But in that belief, you quietly begin to abandon yourself. Choosing self-worth over approval is not a loud declaration. It is often a quiet turning inward, a subtle shift in how you see your own value. It begins when you start to question why someone else's comfort matters more than your peace, why their acceptance feels more important than your truth. And in that questioning, something important starts to awaken. You begin to see that approval is temporary, inconsistent, and often conditional, while self-worth is something you can build within yourself, regardless of who understands you or not. There is a kind of exhaustion that comes from constantly trying to be enough for people who may never decide that you are. You change, you adapt, you overextend, hoping that if you give just a little more of yourself, you will finally feel secure in their regard. But emotional abuse distorts this effort, making you believe that your value must be proven again and again. In reality, worth is not something that needs repetition. It is not earned through sacrifice of identity. It exists even when it is not acknowledged. When you begin to choose self-worth, you start to notice the difference between being accepted and being respected. Acceptance without respect often requires you to shrink, to stay quiet, to stay agreeable, even when something inside you disagrees. But respect allows you to exist fully with your voice, your boundaries, and your truth intact. And once you experience that difference, it becomes harder to return to spaces where you are only valued when you are convenient. This choice is not always comfortable. There may be moments when you feel the pull of old habits, when the desire to be liked feels stronger than the desire to be honest. But every time you choose yourself, even in small ways, you reinforce a deeper understanding that you are not defined by external approval. You begin to trust your own perception more than the shifting opinions of others, and that trust becomes a foundation that cannot easily be shaken. Over time, something powerful happens. The need for constant validation starts to soften. You stop measuring your worth through reactions, praise, or acceptance from others. Instead, you begin to recognize your own voice as a steady guide. You start to understand that disagreement does not diminish you, and distance does not define you. You are still whole, even when not everyone sees it. Choosing self-worth does not mean shutting people out or refusing connection. It means entering connections without abandoning yourself. It means no longer trading your identity for approval that was never guaranteed to last. And in that realization, there is a quiet liberation. You are no longer living to be chosen by everyone else. You are finally choosing yourself, fully and without apology. There is a point in every journey through emotional pain where something begins to shift, not outside of you, but within you. It is not sudden, and it is not dramatic. It often begins quietly, in the spaces where suffering once felt overwhelming, but now feels familiar enough to question. You start to realize that pain, though heavy, has also shaped your awareness. It has sharpened your understanding of yourself, of others, and of the boundaries you once did not know how to set. And in that awareness, something unexpected begins to emerge. The possibility that what hurt you does not have to define you, but can instead refine you. Transforming pain into personal power is not about pretending that what happened was meaningful in a comforting way. It is not about romanticizing what broke you or forcing gratitude onto wounds that took time to endure. It is about acknowledging that even in what you did not choose, you discovered parts of yourself that might have otherwise remained hidden. Strength is not only found in what uplifts you, but also in what you survive and eventually learn to understand. There was a time when the pain may have felt like the center of your identity, as if everything you were was shaped around what you endured, but slowly you begin to separate yourself from it. You start to see that the experience was something you went through, not something you are. That distinction is quiet but powerful. It allows you to step back and observe your story rather than be trapped inside it. And in that space of observation, you begin to reclaim authorship of your life. Power does not arrive as a sudden feeling of invincibility. It grows in small realizations. The moment you respond differently than you once did, the moment you choose silence where reaction used to control you, the moment you recognize a pattern and decide it no longer has authority over your choices. These moments may seem small, but they accumulate into something steady and undeniable. They become evidence that you are no longer the same person who once felt powerless in the face of emotional harm. There is also a deeper layer to this transformation, one that involves compassion, not only for others, but for yourself. You begin to understand that the version of you who endured that pain was not weak, but trying to survive with the tools available at the time. That realization softens the way you look back. Instead of judgment, there is understanding. Instead of self-blame, there is care. And that care becomes part of your strength. As you continue to grow beyond what hurt you, the pain does not disappear completely, but it changes form. It becomes memory instead of burden. It becomes something that informs your boundaries rather than defines your limits. You start to carry it differently, not as a weight that pulls you down, but as a reminder of what you are no longer willing to accept. In this transformation, power is not about control over others. It is about return to yourself. It is about no longer being shaped by what once diminished you, but instead being guided by what you have learned through it. And in that quiet return, you realize something profound. What once broke your sense of self has also played a role in rebuilding it, not in fragments, but in deeper awareness, stronger clarity, and a presence that no longer fears its own truth.